Adam, like I said, first time these two have met, I had hearkened back to when they were supposed to play in 2020. And I remember I was sitting right here in this seat, and I learned that that game would not occur. That was during the COVID season, of course, a unique year in many ways. And that particular game got canceled literally like 48 hours before it was supposed to happen. So this year will mark the first meeting between the two. Charlotte's been playing football for 12 years now, 10 of them at the FBS level. They do own a win over an ACC team. They beat Duke a couple of years ago in Charlotte. And yet this is a program, Adam, that I don't think has necessarily found its footing fully in where it wants to go. Biff Poggi is their head coach. A really unique story. Longtime high school coach, but also a hedge fund manager. And so he went from high school, where he was very successful, and he worked at Michigan for a couple years, then went back to high school, and using some of the wealth that he gained in his financial field, funded and started a program at a place called St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, which is his home area. In fact, there's plenty of guys that went to St. Francis Academy that are on Charlotte. Left there, back to Michigan as an analyst, tight with Jim Harbaugh. Left Michigan to become the head coach at Charlotte. So had never been an official, like, on-the-field coach at the college level, and clearly had a very diversified, it's important in the financial field, Adam, had a diversified portfolio in his life. So it's his second year there. They were 3-9 last year. They lost their first game 30-7 to James Madison. I don't think that game was as bad as you would think if you saw 30-7. It was 9-7 at halftime. It was 16-7 going to the fourth quarter. So a competitive game that then James Madison, who's a good program, and Carolina we'll see in a couple of weeks, stretched out at the end. Charlotte is a team that has a lot of transfers, a lot. Their quarterback played at Florida last year. In fact, started the game against Florida State last year. Oddly enough, his name is Max. Well, a lot of Maxes. There was Max Brosmer, Max Johnson. Now this is Max Brown. They have, I mean, you look, there's guys from Clemson, and there's guys from Iowa State, and all over Maryland. I mean, like all these different power conference teams, including Carolina. They have 3 listed starters that started their career with the Tar Heels. Justin Olson, who's a wide receiver. Dante Balfour, who's really talented player at corner. I mean, Carolina, I remember Carolina thought he was going to be good, and he has become good. Had an interception in the game against James Madison. And then Jaquarius Conley, who, remember, was he started the entire 2021 season for Carolina. He's one of my Jacksonville bros, went to Northside High School down there in Jacksonville, and just suffered a really severe injury at the end of the 2021 campaign. Was out of football for a year last season, and now is back and is listed as a starter at one of their safety positions. So the point of all that, Adam, is that they do have talent. They have guys who were recruited to the power conference level, and for whatever reason, injury, depth chart, all tale as old as time, just didn't work for whatever reason at their previous stop or stops. So I think Charlotte's defense is solid. The numbers don't look incredible against James Madison. Again, I think a lot of that happened as the game went on. I do think the Tar Heels have the ability to run the ball, and I think that's ultimately what Carolina wants to be this year. I think they will have that chance this week. Charlotte, like Carolina, is trying to figure out its identity on offense. They didn't have a ton of success moving the ball. I think I have this right. I might miss a little bit, Adam, but not by much. Charlotte had 7 possessions after its touchdown in the game against James Madison, and it was 3 turnovers and 4 punts. I think that's right. So, ultimately, I think Carolina's the better team, as you would expect. Carolina's playing at home. The Tar Heels are heavily favored, and I think they should be. Having said all of that, Charlotte's going to be pumped. They also, in addition to the players, Dre Bly is an analyst on their staff, Tim Cross is an analyst on their staff, Tim Brewster is the associate head coach, Ty Greenwood, who was an analyst for Carolina last year, is a assistant coach. Charlotte is going to be pumped to be here. Carolina is not in a place that it can overlook anybody. The Tar Heels have plenty of things to work on. The Tar Heels are still trying to find their way on both sides of the ball, but particularly offensively with all the turnover that we know. So I think Carolina is the better team, and yet Carolina needs – there's still plenty of intrigue to me about this game on how Carolina approaches it. Are the Tar Heels to the point that Mack Brown is asking them to be, where they can just aim for their standard? And what does a now fully in the bucket of Connor Harrell Tar Heel team look like? You're obviously not going to get the final product this week, but I think we're going to start learning that answer.
I think Mack Brown said 23 P4 transfers on Charlotte's Too Deep.
I would believe it. I don't know the number exactly, but there's a lot.
So now, that being said, hit hard by some injuries. Biff gave himself an F- for his training camp in terms of keeping his team healthy. So it sounds like they think they might get one back, but they also lost one off the Too Deep in the James Madison game. It's hard to tell.
Well, it's been a little ambiguous as far as who's hurt and who's not. But if you look at least who was expected to be a starter by entities that cover the 49ers versus who is actually on the depth chart and who played, there were 2 offensive linemen, both guards, a receiver, a running back, and 4 players, maybe 5 players on the defensive side. So they definitely dealt with some injuries. Will those guys be back? Unclear. It's a bit of a moving target, Adam. So, but this is a fact. Charlotte has been hit with some injuries that has kept some guys that they thought would start off the field so far. The level of severity of those injuries, not known, at least by people outside the Charlotte program. Whether they will be available this week, unknown, but it has been some adversity that they have dealt with.
If the Tar Heel defense is as improved as what we thought it showed the signs of being against Minnesota, they have the ability to play really well against Charlotte, and obviously a game that Carolina should win. The Charlotte defense had a little trouble stopping the James Madison quarterback from running the ball. That could bode well for Connor Harrell. Connor Harrell likes to run the ball.
Well, what I was going to say is you watch college football, there are plenty of guys with similar games to Connor Harrell that have a high level of success. You saw it in BC and Florida State. Now, Castellanos, right, is the BC quarterback. I mean, he's been a starter now. I mean, he was a starter all last year. So, I mean, I'm not saying that they are equal players at this moment. You can be successful with the skill set of Connor Harrell at the college level to a very nice degree. And so it's incumbent on the Tar Heels to figure that out. And they all know that. I've said this already before, but I'll say it again. You can win with Connor Harrell. You aren't working with nothing. You are working with a smart, athletic player who wins a lot when he's the starter in his high school career. Is Connor Harrell right now as good as he's going to be? I don't think so. It is up to him now to get better, which everything in his past tells you that he's willing to work to do. And it's up to the Tar Heels to figure out a way to best help him be successful. And again, to me, especially over like the next month, that's what I'm looking forward to watching it happen, because I think the potential is there for a really, really good marriage between the two.
Well, and if you've been watching Carolina football for a long time, you know that there have been years where you feel like the Tar Heels might have to win maybe somewhat in spite of the person playing quarterback for the Tar Heels. That's not the case with Connor Harrell. He's better than that. It's just a very different way than potentially what the Tar Heels have played the last few years. I think it's pretty interesting that both the football team and the basketball team probably going to play markedly differently this school year than they did last school year in order to win. But it's just going to show us all that there are different ways to win. And I mean, Carolina's more gifted and talented than Charlotte. So the Tar Heels should be able to try some things, see what works, see what everybody's comfortable with. The best news is you've still got Omarion Hampton on your team. And if things get bad, you just turn around and hand the ball to him, because as he's going to tell you, he can carry the ball as many times as you need.
I do think that aspect is worth watching. I don't think Carolina wants Omarion Hampton to have 30 carries this week. Anytime he touches the ball is a good thing for Carolina. I just don't think you would, if you're the Tar Heels, you would hope that you don't have to give him the ball that much this week. He had more carries than any other running back in the country last week, which is fine. Carolina needed it. And he's after the interview was over, Adam was talking to Omarion about carries, and he was like, I'll carry as much as I give it to me every time. He just wants the ball. But I think long run, Carolina feels like it's got some other backs that it would like to work into the game and get them some experience. And no sense in putting tread on the tires if it's not needed. So that'll be something worth watching. Certainly Omarion Hampton's going to get some touches this week, but you would not figure that it's going to be as high as last week. And, Adam, I do think there's that stat that you've heard me say a bunch, and we've talked about how many yards after contact he has. I mean, it was crazy. Last year, it was 71.3% of his yards were after contact. In the first game of the year, 71.3% of his yards were after contact. So I think for Carolina, the goal is get him some easier yards, get him in open space, because that's the thing about Omarion Hampton. He is not just like he can be a pound you into submission guy, but if he gets out in the open field, he can outrun you too. So I think Carolina would like to find easier yards for him than maybe you saw last week.
That's part of having depth. You got to play it. And I think the Tar Heels do feel like they have depth at that position.
3:30. We're on the air at 2:30 for Carolina and Charlotte.